The first thing Alexander Blackwell noticed was the boy. He wasn't supposed to notice him. Not here, not tonight, in a ballroom that shimmered like a dream spun from gold and crystal. The chandeliers dripped light across marble floors, over champagne flutes that glimmered like diamonds, and across guests in gowns that cost more than most people made in a year. Laughter floated like music, but underneath it was a quiet hum of judgment, a soft whispering that slithered around the room. Alexander leaned back in his tailored suit, a glass of vintage champagne in his hand, savoring the admiration that followed him wherever he went. Heads turned when he entered. Eyes lingered. He was power. He was untouchable. He was Alexander Blackwell. And then he saw the boy. Barefoot. Ragged clothes that hung loosely, worn at the seams. Small hands trembling as they gripped the hand of a young woman barely able to stand. Her legs quivered like saplings in the wind. Alexander's fiancée, a woman whose elegance was carved from ice, froze, her smile faltering for just a heartbeat. She leaned forward, whispering so sharp it cut the air. "She can't be here. This isn't for people like her." Her words were meant to wound, to make the boy flinch, to make him retreat into the shadows where the poor belonged. But he didn't flinch. "She can walk," he said, his voice soft, barely above a whisper. But somehow it carried across the room, slicing through the murmur of gossip, the clinking of glasses, the polite hum of music. Heads turned. Eyes widened. The glittering crowd leaned in without realizing it, drawn to a small boy who dared to speak in the house of the untouchable. Alexander chuckled. A short, sharp sound, more a bark than a laugh. "Do you really think she belongs here?" he asked, his voice sharp as the crystal chandeliers. He let the laughter roll across the room, attempting to assert control. It should have ended the moment. It should have scared them. But it didn't. The boy's eyes held steady, calm, burning with something Alexander couldn't name. Every inch of him screamed determination. Every inch of the young woman's body, trembling and fragile, was refusing to bend. Pride clung to her like a second skin. She straightened, lifting herself against the weight of whispers and judgment, against the invisible chains that tried to bind her. The boy's words came again, this time louder, steadier. "She can walk. And she will. Your rules don't stop her." Silence. Not polite, awkward silence. Not the soft hush that comes when someone trips or a wineglass tips. This was a heavy, suffocating pause that pressed against the chandeliers, the mirrors, the glittering floors. It hung between them like smoke. Alexander felt it first in his chest. A small prick, almost imperceptible. Guilt. Confusion. Curiosity. He didn't know. He hated that he didn't know. How could a boy so small, so seemingly powerless, shake a man who controlled empires? Who commanded armies of wealth, influence, and fear? How could he? And yet he had. The fiancée, her composure cracking, stepped closer. Her eyes narrowed, cutting through the crowd with a frost that made people glance away. "She's nothing," she hissed, her voice sharp and deliberate. "She's weak. She doesn't belong here." The young woman's lips pressed together. Her eyes shimmered, but she didn't speak. She didn't need to. Every quiver of her body, every step she resisted taking backward, shouted louder than any protest. The boy didn't speak for her anymore. He simply held her hand, stood beside her, a shield made not of money but of unwavering faith. The crowd felt it. They watched. The whispers faltered. Eyes darted from Alexander to the boy, to the girl, and back again, trying to understand the storm unfolding in the middle of their carefully curated elegance. Alexander's mind raced. He could not command this. He could not laugh it away. Every attempt to regain control only highlighted the cracks in his armor. Something he had never known before was creeping inside him, a sense of smallness. The kind that doesn't care about wealth. That doesn't bow to authority. That can't be bought with champagne or bows or apologies. The boy, standing barefoot and ragged, had shattered the illusion. He looked at the girl. Her legs shook, her hands gripped his, her eyes bright with courage. She wasn't just walking, she was defying every assumption that had ever been made about people like her. About people below his world. About people without a voice, without power, without privilege. And she was standing taller than he had seen anyone in years. Taller than him. In that moment, Alexander understood that this wasn't about the girl walking. It was about what her walking represented. It was about the courage to claim dignity in a world that told you you didn't deserve it. The air in the ballroom felt different. He could see it. Guests shifted, unsure where to look. The music seemed softer now, less triumphant, more like the heartbeat of a storm building slowly, inexorably. His fiancée's sneer faltered, replaced by something else. Fear. Embarrassment. Something she couldn't name. She tried to assert control, to regain the narrative, but the room no longer belonged entirely to her. It had shifted. The axis had tilted slightly, a subtle shift that Alexander felt deep in his chest, a sensation that unsettled him more than any financial loss ever could. Alexander raised his hand, unsure what he meant to do. He wanted to laugh. He wanted to command, to wave away this insolence. But his hand froze. He couldn't. He had never encountered defiance that didn't bend, that didn't break under pressure. And here it was. Small. Quiet. Yet unstoppable. The boy looked at him then. No fear. No hesitation. Just a quiet certainty. And Alexander saw, in that calm, steady gaze, a challenge. Not a childish challenge, not a foolish one. A moral challenge. A test of character he had not known he was capable of facing. The boy dared him to see, truly see, not the woman's weakness, not her poverty, not her place in the world, but her humanity. Her courage. Her dignity. Alexander laughed again, this time quieter, tighter. But even the laugh didn't hide the stirrings of something unfamiliar. Something uncomfortable. Something necessary. The first crack had appeared. And he could feel it. He could feel the walls around his pride, his control, his invincibility beginning to splinter. The young woman's lips curved into the faintest smile, though her legs still trembled. She wasn't fully steady yet. But she didn't look away. She met the gazes of the people around her, refusing to shrink, refusing to disappear. And for the first time that night, Alexander realized that control, power, and wealth meant nothing when confronted with courage that refused to be denied. The boy squeezed her hand, a silent anchor. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The room waited. The chandeliers swayed slightly in the quiet. Wine glasses caught the light and shimmered like tiny stars. But all Alexander could see was the defiance of a young woman who should have been invisible, a boy who dared to challenge the mighty, and the hollow weight of his own ego beginning to crumble. This was more than confrontation. More than humiliation. It was a quiet storm erupting in a glittering palace of privilege. It was a lesson no money could teach, no power could enforce. And Alexander, the untouchable, the admired, the feared, realized something he had never allowed himself to imagine. The world could be challenged by the smallest hands, and those challenges could be unstoppable. The first crack had appeared. And Alexander knew, deep down, that this night would not end the way he had expected. Alexander's hand hovered in the air, half raised as if to command silence, half raised to assert control he no longer fully felt. He opened his mouth, intending to dismiss them with authority, to remind the boy and the trembling girl exactly who ruled this room. "You don't understand the rules here," he said, voice sharp, measured, dripping with the kind of confidence that had always worked. The words were supposed to end it. They were supposed to make them bow, to make them disappear, like everyone else who had dared to step out of line. But they didn't. The boy's eyes met his, steady, unwavering. He didn't flinch. He didn't step back. He held the young woman's hand with a quiet certainty that felt heavier than any marble column, stronger than any chandelier, stronger than Alexander's authority. "She's stronger than you think," the boy said. His voice was soft, almost gentle, but the words landed like a hammer, echoing across the marble floors. "And you'll see soon enough." Alexander's chest tightened. Something in him, a mixture of disbelief and irritation, surged. His fiancée, standing behind him in a gown that gleamed like frost, laughed then, a sound so cruel, so sharp it cut the tension in half and tried to reclaim the room. She leaned forward, voice slicing through the murmurs of guests. "Look at her," she hissed, pointing at the young woman, who still trembled from head to toe. "She's weak. Useless. Invisible. She shouldn't even be here. This place isn't meant for her kind." Her words were like knives, meant to wound, to shame, to reinforce the invisible walls of power that kept the wealthy untouchable. But the girl did not flinch. She did not retreat. She didn't even blink. The boy squeezed her hand, a steady, grounding force. And then, slowly, deliberately, the girl straightened her spine, lifted her chin, and drew a trembling breath. She planted one foot forward. Just one. And then another. It was not graceful. It was not effortless. It was a fight. A battle waged in silence against every voice that had ever told her she didn't belong. Her steps were tiny, hesitant, but they carried a weight that no wealth or arrogance could diminish. She was walking. She was standing. And she refused to collapse beneath the judgment of a room built for privilege. The crowd started to murmur. Low, nervous whispers that replaced the laughter and mockery. Some glanced at Alexander, searching for a reaction, searching for permission to laugh or to join in the humiliation. But Alexander's heart pounded too fiercely for him to command the room. His pulse hammered in his ears as he watched her, a strange feeling stirring, something like guilt, like fear, like awe. He tried to speak again, offering help. "Let me," he started, but stopped. What could he offer? Money, power, influence. None of it would halt this display of courage. The girl didn't need anything from him. She didn't need charity. She needed respect. She needed acknowledgement. She needed to be seen. And in that moment, he realized the truth. No amount of wealth, no degree of influence, could command dignity. She had it. And he did not. His fiancée's face twisted with anger. Her composure, so meticulously maintained, cracked. She hissed behind her hand, trying to hide her shock, trying to reclaim control, but it was slipping through her fingers like water. Her voice rose, trembling with fury, calling the girl names meant to wound, meant to erase her presence. Weak. Pathetic. Insignificant. Invisible. Yet the girl's steps did not falter. Her knees wobbled, her body shook, but her eyes shone brighter than any chandelier. One wobbly step became two. Two became three. Each movement a silent protest. Each step a refusal to disappear. Each step a quiet revolution in a world that had trained Alexander to expect obedience and subservience. The boy stood tall beside her, the quiet anchor in the storm. He didn't need to speak anymore. His presence alone lent weight to her defiance. Every eye in the room followed her progress, some leaning forward in disbelief, others craning to watch a moment of courage unfold. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The room, so carefully arranged, so full of opulence, no longer felt safe for arrogance. The walls of privilege trembled under the quiet rebellion of a girl who had nothing to lose but her fear. Alexander's ego, the one he had polished and protected all his life, flinched in ways he had never expected. He felt small, not diminished by wealth, but humbled by courage, by dignity, by the simple act of someone standing firm in the face of scorn. He tried again, a different approach, offering a hand, a gesture, a whisper of control disguised as generosity. "Take my arm. Let me help you." His words, meant to assert his authority subtly, fell flat. She didn't reach for him. She didn't need his help. She needed space. She needed her own strength recognized. And as she continued to move, her steps gaining confidence, Alexander felt a pang he had never known, the sting of irrelevance. The sting of being powerless to command respect where it had not been earned. He had built empires, controlled companies, commanded rooms, yet here he was, stunned by a barefoot girl and the small boy beside her. He had never felt so small. The crowd's whispers grew louder, a low murmur of awe and disbelief. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, unsure where to look, unsure how to react. They had expected humiliation, spectacle, perhaps pity. They had expected the weak to crumble. And yet, here was defiance, raw and unpolished, impossible to ignore. Every step the girl took was a rebuke to the arrogance around her, a lesson the wealthy would never anticipate. Alexander's fiancée recoiled, her carefully constructed image cracking further with every step. Anger, embarrassment, and panic swirled behind her eyes, and she struggled to maintain dominance in a room she had assumed would always bow to her control. But the room was no longer hers to command. Not tonight. Not while courage had taken the floor. Alexander's hands clenched at his sides. He wanted to move forward, to assert himself, to regain the narrative. But he could not. He was trapped by something greater than wealth, greater than status, greater than privilege. Courage, integrity, determination. Things that could not be bought. Things that could not be threatened. The girl's steps, each one unsteady yet deliberate, became louder in their moral resonance than any voice raised in authority. She was teaching a lesson without words. She was demanding recognition, demanding dignity, demanding respect. And Alexander, the untouchable, the powerful, could do nothing but watch. Time seemed to stretch, slow, expand. Every movement, every whisper, every glance carried weight. The boy remained steadfast beside her, a quiet force of loyalty and faith, unwilling to let the world trample her resolve. Together, they reshaped the room, redefined the space, turned expectation on its head. And Alexander felt the first crack widen, a fissure of awareness opening in his consciousness. He saw what he had never seen before, that power is not in wealth. That authority is not in influence. That respect is not commanded, it is earned, it is lived, it is demonstrated by courage in the face of dismissal. The girl's foot hit the floor again, and the sound was like a drumbeat. It echoed through the hall, through Alexander's mind, through the very assumptions he had built his life on. He couldn't stop it. He didn't want to. He wanted to understand it, to grasp it, to control it, but control had slipped through his fingers. And as she straightened her shoulders, holding herself taller with every wobbling step, Alexander realized something profound. He had underestimated the power of someone who refuses to be invisible. The boy, small and ragged, had orchestrated this without threat, without violence, without malice. He had simply believed. Alexander's chest ached with a new, unfamiliar emotion, humility. Not the polite humility of public appearances, but the deep, unsettling, transforming kind. The kind that shifts the axis of a life built on control. The kind that teaches that courage, dignity, and humanity cannot be bought, cannot be ordered, cannot be denied. And as the young woman continued to move, her chin high, her eyes focused, her hands trembling but free, Alexander understood that the room had changed. Not forever, perhaps, but tonight. Tonight it had been reshaped by courage, by determination, by the quiet, unstoppable insistence that no one could dictate her worth. And in that moment, he felt small. Not because the world had stripped him, but because someone had shown him the true measure of strength. And it was not money. It was not power. It was the refusal to bow, the refusal to shrink, the refusal to disappear. Then it happened. She reached the center of the room, and for a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. The chandelier's crystals shimmered, but the sparkle felt muted, as though the air itself had thickened, holding its breath. Silence fell over the ballroom like a velvet curtain. Not a polite hush, not the quiet that followed an awkward stumble, but the kind of silence that presses against your chest, heavy, impossible to ignore. Every whispered conversation, every soft laugh, every clink of a champagne glass stopped. All eyes were on her. The girl. Barefoot, trembling, yet unbroken. Alexander Blackwell, the man who had never been unsettled in his life, froze. He could no longer hide the astonishment on his face. His tailored suit felt heavier than ever. His power, his wealth, his control, all of it meant nothing now. She was not just standing. She was walking. With a quiet strength that no ballroom, no money, no title could contain. Each step carried defiance. Each step carried the dignity that had been denied to her for too long. She moved slowly, carefully, balancing fear and courage in every trembling movement. Her gaze swept across the room, not out of arrogance, but with a calm that demanded recognition. Alexander watched, his pulse racing, his ego jolted in ways he hadn't anticipated. How could someone so fragile appear so formidable? How could the world he had built around rules and hierarchies be challenged by something so simple, so human, as courage? The boy stepped closer, his small hand still holding hers. He didn't need to speak. His presence alone anchored her. His eyes met Alexander's, steady, unwavering, challenging. "She can walk," he said again, this time softer, almost a warning, almost a prophecy. It wasn't just about the legs beneath her, it was about the soul inside her, unbending, unshakable. Alexander blinked, and in that blink, he saw himself, not in the mirror behind the ballroom, not in the polished reflection of marble and gold, but in the stark, undeniable truth of his life. Privilege, arrogance, entitlement. The kind that blinded him to courage unless it bent to his rules, to respect unless it was earned by wealth or status. And here it was, undeniable and unbowed, standing in front of him, defying all of it. His fiancée's face twisted. Her carefully maintained control shattered like glass. She opened her mouth, but no words came that could undo what was happening. Her laughter had no edge. Her scorn fell flat. The crowd shifted. Some applauded, hesitant, unsure whether it was appropriate to celebrate the courage before them. Some gasped, their faces a mixture of shock and awe. But everyone saw it. Everyone felt it. The reversal was complete. The powerless had risen. The mighty were stunned. Alexander's hands, so used to commanding obedience, trembled slightly. For the first time, he understood that authority alone could not command respect. Power alone could not instill courage. She walked with a grace that seemed effortless, though every muscle in her body ached with the effort of defying expectations. Her steps were slow, deliberate, each one a quiet defiance against every sneer, every whispered insult, every glance that had ever told her she was less. She was more than her trembling knees, more than her bare feet on marble. She was more than the world had permitted her to believe. And as she reached the center, she lifted her chin, meeting the gaze of those who had doubted her, and her eyes shone with a kind of clarity that made hearts race and mouths fall silent. Alexander's fiancée tried again, snapping insults, attempting to reclaim dominance, but the words sounded hollow, echoes of control that no longer mattered. She moved forward, ready to intervene, to shame, to pull her back into invisibility, but the girl did not waver. Not a step. Not a flicker. Not a breath wasted on fear. And in that moment, the ballroom felt different. The air had shifted. The music, still playing softly, seemed almost irrelevant. This was no longer a gathering of wealth and power, it was a stage for something infinitely larger, courage asserting itself against arrogance. The boy watched Alexander, silent but commanding. There was no anger in him, no desire for revenge, no malice. Only faith. Only belief that the girl could rise. That dignity could win, even in a room built on judgment and privilege. And Alexander felt it, like a hand pressing against his chest, like ice in his veins. The seed of shame and wonder and something unnameable had been planted in him. Respect could not be bought. Authority could not manufacture courage. And for the first time, he understood that power without empathy was hollow, empty, fragile. The girl paused for just a moment, letting the eyes of the crowd settle on her. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her mere presence was enough. Every step she had taken had rewritten the rules of the room. Every wobble, every breath, every small victory had been a challenge that the mighty could not ignore. Alexander's pulse raced. He felt the weight of every insult he had ever thrown, every disregard he had ever shown, every assumption he had ever made about people like her, like the boy. And now, standing there, he realized he had been wrong. He had been blind. The crowd's reaction grew more audible. Some clapped softly, uncertain, some whispered to each other, sharing the astonishment, but all were witnesses. They were witnesses to the reversal of roles, to the underdog prevailing in a room built to humiliate them, to courage standing in the face of entitlement. And Alexander felt the strange, unsteady sensation of humility settle over him. It was foreign. It was uncomfortable. But it was necessary. It was truth. The girl took another step, then another, until she stood fully upright, feet steady, gaze unwavering. The boy's hand tightened briefly around hers, a silent gesture of triumph. And Alexander, for all his wealth and control, had no words, no gestures, no authority that could diminish the moment. He could only watch. And as he watched, something inside him shifted. A crack in his armor. A glimmer of understanding. A seed of transformation taking root. He realized, in that quiet, weighty moment, that life's true currency was courage. Respect could not be bought. Dignity could not be enforced. And power, if wielded without humanity, was meaningless. The girl's victory was not in her feet. It was not in her movement across marble floors. It was moral. It was ethical. It was profound. She had challenged a system that told her she didn't belong and won, not with force, not with wealth, not with malice, but with a quiet, stubborn insistence on her own humanity. And Alexander, the untouchable, the wealthy, the mighty, had no choice but to confront himself. He looked at the boy again. He saw the faith, the patience, the strength it had taken to orchestrate this moment without a single word of anger, without a single act of vengeance. And in that gaze, Alexander understood that courage often comes quietly, humbly, invisibly, yet its impact is seismic. It changes rooms. It changes people. It changes worlds. Alexander's hands, still trembling slightly, rested at his sides. He didn't know how long he stood there, watching the girl claim what was always hers: respect, dignity, recognition. He didn't need to intervene. He didn't need to command. He couldn't. And that was the lesson. That was the turning point. He realized that the world he had built to celebrate power and wealth was fragile in the face of integrity, in the face of courage, in the face of people who refused to be invisible. And as the girl finally paused, breathing steady now, chin high, eyes calm, the first real understanding of life's truth settled in Alexander's heart. Money could buy everything but character. Status could demand obedience but not respect. Authority could intimidate but could never manufacture courage. And for the first time, he realized that the world might be rich, opulent, and glittering, but true wealth resided in the strength of those who refused to be diminished. The seed of transformation had been planted, and Alexander knew, deep down, that nothing would ever be the same. The ballroom was quiet now. The last echoes of laughter, the faint tinkle of glasses, and the soft murmur of shocked whispers had faded into memory. Chandeliers hung above, their crystals catching the dimmed light, casting fragile patterns across the polished marble floor. The glittering empire of wealth, elegance, and pretense that had filled the room hours before now felt hollow, like an empty stage after a play has ended. Alexander Blackwell stood alone, the weight of everything he had just witnessed pressing down on him. The fiancée who had ruled the room with icy authority had stormed out in a fury, her anger sharp and hot, leaving behind a trail of whispered rumors and shattered control. The guests had departed quietly, some still shaking their heads, some whispering to each other about what they had just seen. But for Alexander, the world had narrowed down to two people: the boy and the girl who had walked through his world, unbroken, and changed it forever. He stepped forward, the sound of his own shoes echoing against the marble. He felt small, exposed, unarmed against the force of their courage. And it wasn't fear of failure, or fear of ridicule, or even fear of being challenged. It was the piercing, undeniable truth that he had been wrong for so long. Wrong in the ways he measured worth. Wrong in the ways he judged strength. Wrong in the assumptions he had made about people who did not come from wealth, people who did not know his life, people who lived in a world that demanded survival instead of indulgence. He looked at the girl, the one who had taken each trembling step, who had refused to collapse under judgment, and he saw something he had never truly valued before: dignity. Not the kind he could purchase for himself, but the kind that arises from endurance, from quiet resistance, from refusing to be invisible when the world insists you should be. Alexander knelt. It was not a gesture of grandeur. It was not a calculated performance for the crowd that had long gone. It was a gesture of recognition, humility, and understanding. His eyes met hers, and he spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying the weight of years spent blind to what mattered. "I am sorry," he said. Not for her walking. Not for the courage she had displayed. Not for the simple act of standing where she had every right to be. He was sorry for himself. For his blindness. For his arrogance. For the years he had spent measuring people's worth by the size of their wallets, the names on their invitations, the addresses on their envelopes. For the times he had assumed control was power, and power was respect. For every time he had failed to see the humanity in someone who didn't look like him, dress like him, or move like him. The boy's eyes met his, calm and unwavering. No words passed between them, but Alexander could feel the acknowledgement, the quiet validation that this was enough. The boy had orchestrated everything with no malice, no anger, only belief. Belief in the girl. Belief in what was right. Belief in a world that, despite the walls of privilege, could still bend under courage and dignity. Alexander felt a knot in his chest loosen, a weight he hadn't realized he carried for decades beginning to lift. The girl, still holding her head high, still steady though her muscles ached, offered him a small, tired smile. It wasn't a triumphant grin or a victory lap. It was subtle, gentle, and profound. She had walked, yes. But more than that, she had endured. She had faced judgment, scorn, and the unspoken rules of a world that had never wanted her to succeed. And in that endurance, she had proven something essential. Dignity could not be crushed. It could not be bought, stolen, or ignored. It could only be respected. Alexander saw it, and he knew in a way he had never known before that all the wealth, all the influence, all the control in the world meant nothing if it failed to recognize the humanity of others. He swallowed hard, feeling the edges of his pride fray. The lessons of the night were clear, but their depth was staggering. Power was not in status or money. Influence was not in control. Respect was not commanded. It was earned by action, by courage, by refusing to be diminished. The girl's journey across that marble floor, guided silently by the boy's steadfast faith, had rewritten the rules he had lived by. The arrogance that had once filled him now seemed hollow. The world he had controlled so carefully had revealed itself to be fragile, imperfect, and blind. Alexander took a step closer to them, still kneeling, still humbled, still learning. He looked at the boy, saw the quiet pride in his posture, the calm in his gaze, and understood that true strength often hides in unexpected places. It was not measured by titles, nor by wealth, nor by power. It was measured in persistence, in patience, in the refusal to bow to the weight of others' judgments. The boy had taught him that tonight, without raising his voice, without demanding attention, without a single act of aggression. The girl shifted slightly, her foot brushing the marble, and Alexander noticed the quiet relief in her eyes. She had accomplished what no one had expected. She had crossed the threshold that had been built for the privileged alone and emerged standing, victorious in a way that money could never mimic. Her triumph was moral, it was ethical, it was spiritual. And Alexander, witnessing it, felt a deep shift in his soul. The hollowness he had carried through decades of indulgence and control began to fill, slowly, with understanding. For a long moment, none of them spoke. The silence stretched, heavy with significance. It was not awkward. It was sacred. It was the recognition of truth laid bare. Courage is louder than wealth. Integrity is stronger than influence. Humanity surpasses status. And Alexander, kneeling on the marble, understood that his life had changed. Not because the girl had walked, but because she had shown him what walking truly meant, through adversity, through judgment, through the crushing weight of expectation, into a space of recognition, respect, and dignity. He rose slowly, deliberately, feeling the difference in his body, in his spirit, in his heart. He saw the world anew. He saw his own life anew. And he knew he would never look at power in the same way again. He understood that greatness is not measured by control. It is measured by the ability to recognize and honor strength where it is least expected. It is measured by humility, by acknowledgement, by the willingness to see and affirm what others bring to the world simply by existing, by resisting, by claiming their place with dignity. The girl offered him a nod, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual recognition. The boy, still steadfast, mirrored the sentiment. No words were necessary. The lesson had been taught. The room, though now empty of guests, felt charged with it. Alexander understood that tonight, the ballroom had become more than a showcase of wealth. It had become a testament to courage, to dignity, to the power of belief in the overlooked, the underestimated, the invisible. And as the last echoes of the evening faded, as the chandeliers shimmered one final time and the marble floors gleamed under the dimming lights, Alexander carried a new truth in his heart. True greatness does not come from commanding others, nor from controlling worlds, nor from accumulating wealth. True greatness comes from recognizing strength in places society has ignored. True greatness comes from humility, from honor, from seeing the humanity in everyone. And sometimes, the smallest voices carry the loudest lessons, the ones that echo long after the room has emptied, long after the wealth and status have faded, long after the world has assumed it is still in control. He would never forget it.